Welcome to my channel, Beautiful Basket Case. My name is Shay, and on this channel I like to discuss recovery, health, and wellness. I also have a huge passion for music, so you can find some of that content on here as well. If you believe in the movement that I'm trying to make and bringing awareness to recovery, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button below. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's get into it. So in this video, we will be discussing trauma bonding, Stockholm Syndrome, what that means, some symptoms you may be in a trauma bonded situation, and how it can affect us. Before we get into it, if you're interested in the topic, please give this video a like, and if you haven't already, please go down and subscribe. It's the red button, or you can hit the logo BBC on the bottom right. Alright, so starting with Stockholm Syndrome. Well, what is Stockholm Syndrome? So Disney did a great job on displaying a movie that perfectly shows you what Stockholm Syndrome is. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Beauty and the Beast, but if you have, you already have a baseline of what that looks like. So the term Stockholm Syndrome came from a bank robbery that happened in August of 1973 in Stockholm, Sweden. 4 bank employees were held hostage for 6 days, wrapped in dynamite, and then held in a bank vault. They shocked everyone that in 6 days they actually became attached to their captors. They even turned away legal forces, feeling bad for them. They were not helping law enforcement at all with information. And even after, once they were released, some of them actually stayed in contact with their captors. They refused to testify against them in court, and it was actually quite the opposite. They were defending them. So, turns out in a psychological manner, we can oftentimes attach to our abusers as a way to survive. We feel as though if we show this person that we care, in a sense, that same care will be returned back to us. By being nice to our abusers, we do so subconsciously as a coping skill to live through it. Our brains go into survival mode as a way to help us get through traumatic situations. This oftentimes will happen if we're in a state of hopelessness or frustration. So a lot of battered men and women will actually refuse to testify against their spouse that has abused them, and many will bail them out of jail and even go as far as reversing consequences. So there's 4 factors that need to be in play in order for Stockholm Syndrome to take place. So number 1, we must feel threatened, either physically or psychologically, believing that our captor or abuser will actually act out their threats. A lot of times this can happen indirectly, such as throwing things or breaking things, right? They may start to talk about harming something or someone that you care about, and that includes animals as well. So the second part that needs to be in play, and this is where the psychological part can shift, is that the abuser will actually show a small amount of kindness. In Stockholm, they actually convinced themselves that their captors cared about them because they were feeding them and supplying them with water and allowing them to live. The abuser ended up opening up to them and sharing with them how difficult their life had been as a child, and it was all basically to gain their sympathy. This led the victims into believing that this person could change along with the situation. So the abuser may even start to give gifts and provide in other ways to convince the victim that they are not all that bad of a person and that they do actually generally care. A lot of people would claim that their abuser didn't abuse them in a situation that they normally would have, so that's leading them to believe that the absence of abuse is actually showing kindness. So they can share with them times in their lives when they themselves have been abused, and this is kind of like a strategy that they use to humanize themselves, and in turn it will make the other person feel bad for them, trying to make excuses for their behavior as if they don't already know better, or that's all they've ever known, so their behavior is taken more lightly. So the third factor that needs to be in place is being isolated from others' perspectives. So an example of this would be, I don't like those people because they talk bad about me. So now the abuser is trying to convince the victim to not hang out with these people, and if they do, there will be acts of abuse after the fact. This is to condition them from seeing their friends and family and seeing their take on the situation. The victim will start to isolate themselves and push people away in fear of getting abused or stirring the pot, claiming that their friends and family are causing trouble and ruining their relationship. After becoming so isolated from people that they care about and the people on the outside who can clearly see the situation at hand, they then begin to only see the cycle of abuse and the abusive lifestyle. So basically walking on eggshells, they tend to do anything to avoid starting conflict. They may even start to see things from the abuser's perspective, and that's basically just to keep the abuse at bay. Making sure that everything is just the way they like it, because if not, they don't know what's going to happen. And that leads us to our number 4 factor that needs to be in place for Stockholm Syndrome to be a thing, and that is solely feeling like you cannot escape. So the most common situation is through money, okay? The abuser may overextend and provide for them, in which making it seem impossible for these people to survive on their own in fear that they're going to end up on the street. Another factor is through the emotional aspect, and that's knowing intimate and embarrassing details about the victim and threatening that if they leave, they're going to leak all their information. The plan is to shame them publicly. They may even start to videotape their victim in an emotional outburst to basically claim that they are the victim and not the abuser. They may also threaten to commit suicide or homicide of a child, friend, family, or even an animal. And this is leaving the abused person to believe that they can't leave or their loved ones are in harm's way. So real quick, I want to talk to you guys about what the cycle of abuse looks like. So there's 4 phases of the cycle of abuse. 1 being the building of tension. 2, the act of abuse, whether it's physical or verbal. 3, reconciliation. And 4, calm. This will continue to go around and around and around in circles, and if you live in the cycle of abuse, you will begin to start seeing the patterns. So let's get on to trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is basically another phrase used to describe Stockholm Syndrome. Trauma bonding is the loyalty to a person that has repetitively hurt you, okay? This person could be a narcissist or a sociopath, but really the diagnosis doesn't matter. The only person that matters here is you and your well-being. So why do we feel there is hope in a situation that we continuously see history repeating itself and nothing changes? Well, it's because we have become used to the cycle, and this has now actually become a way of life for us. So here are some symptoms that you may be trauma bonded. Number 1, the other person continues to hurt you repetitively, yet you continue to believe that there's hope. No matter how many times you try to explain to this person how their actions are hurtful, they will continue to disrespect you. They may even apologize and say sorry in the moment, but eventually they are always going to fall back to their disrespectful, abusive patterns and behaviors. You assume that they have no control over their actions, but quite the opposite is true. We all have control over our own behaviors, and when somebody is telling us that we have indeed hurt them, we have a choice on whether or not we are going to continue in that behavior. We all slip up sometimes, that's human nature in us, but if they continue to hurt you and disrespect you, they are doing so on some level of consciousness and intention. If you are having trouble seeing that or getting out of this situation, there's a good chance that you could be trauma bonded. So symptom number 2. When you talk about this situation with other people, the people that you have expressed it to seem to be more offended and more appalled than you actually feel. That's because we glaze over the bad things that are happening to us. We become accustomed and used to the way this person is treating us that we begin to make excuses for their behavior. If you find yourself constantly justifying why this person isn't that bad or it's not always like that, you may be trauma bonded. So number 3. You feel stuck in a negative loop that you have no control over. Oftentimes we can look at this like a roller coaster or a hamster wheel, Your only goal is for things to settle down, but no matter how hard you try, you can never get the waters to settle. If you find yourself constantly back and forth between negative and positive, abuse and reconciliation, and constant turmoil, you may be trauma bonded. So number 4, you spend a lot of your own time trying to get this person to see the light. You're oftentimes trying to convince them to change or seek help. You may have thought of every avenue on how you can explain this to them, thinking that if you only rehearsed it better, that somehow it would sink in and get through to them. You think this is so obvious, but they just don't seem to understand. And if they do understand, it's only in the moment, and it's not long after until they return back to their abusive behaviors. This is determined on how much time you have tried to convince them. If you find that there's a good portion of your relationship where you're constantly trying to fix them, again, there's a good chance that you are trauma bonded. So number 5, and this stems from number 4, you spend a lot of your time trying to find new ways to get through to this person. You will continue to have the same argument over and over and over again, continuing to try to express your feelings towards the situation and what's happening and how this person is hurting you. It may start in different ways, but ultimately it's always going to end up in the same place. If you're dealing with a narcissist, you may feel as though this conversation is going to forever be unresolved unless you walk away. They will warp your reality to try and steer you away from your own point of view. This is to get you to second guess yourself, your own emotions, and your own thoughts. The truth is, people are not as dense as we try to convince ourselves that they are, okay? They are very aware of how they are hurting you, and they just refuse to take ownership of their own behavior. They do not want to get your point, okay? Because that would mean that they have to accept that they're doing something wrong, and then they would have to make changes, and that's not something that they want to do. So take a moment and think to yourself how much time you've spent in these circular arguments, and if you can relate to this, again, good chance you're probably trauma bonded. So last symptom that you may be trauma bonded, number 6. You have already tried to detach from this person in some way and have not been successful. If they leave you, you make a commitment to not go back, but when they reappear, you continue to let them back in. Or maybe it was you that left, but again, you always continue to go back. When you are apart, you can't stop thinking about how to get them back. You feel as though you're not whole as a person unless you're with them. You may feel like you have a spiritual connection with this person, and a part of you is missing when you're not with them. When you are trauma bonded, you are not thinking logically about the situation. If you were to see somebody else in this situation, you can easily see what's going on and you would easily make the right decision. But when you yourself is in this situation, it is very difficult to see logic at all. So again, if you can relate to any or all of the things that I just mentioned, I strongly suggest that you start to evaluate the situation and maybe seek psychological help in aiding you in the right direction so that you can heal and get out of this situation. It's difficult to admit that we are trauma bonded because that would mean we would have to detach from this person. In a sense, we've become used to being uncomfortable in an uncomfortable situation. So we may try to see the situation as half full, considering that the abuse is not a constant. There are moments, maybe few, maybe often, where they display loving behavior, but in the end, there is still abuse taking place in this never-ending cycle. Your self-esteem becomes attached to this person, so when they praise you, you feel as though you win, and then when they put you down, you feel as though you have failed completely. However they see you is how you will begin to start seeing yourself. You will lose your sense of self and feel as though you need this person's approval, which is a seriously dangerous place to be at. Being in a relationship that continues to go through these cycles and these phases, you can actually begin to take on these traits yourself. It's kind of like a defense mechanism. If you feel yourself starting to become the person that you aren't deep down inside and you start to display your own form of abuse towards this person, I really hope that you guys start to evaluate the situation and start to research what trauma bonding is on your own so you can get a better insight as to why you can't seem to leave this situation. So I would love for you guys to write in the comments below, maybe if you have experienced what trauma bonding is and what that situation looked like for you, because I would love to hear you guys' recovery stories, and or if you could leave support for those that may still be in this situation and need a little encouragement on getting out. So also be on the lookout for my next video on trauma bonding and how you can escape the trauma bond and coping skills to rebuild up your self-esteem. So that's all for this video. Again, if you like this video, if you like the information, if you like me, give this video a thumbs up, go ahead and share it, and I'll see you guys in my next video. God bless, guys.